And so the way I think about the magazine is that we create content around empathy and the inner world values. So compassion and kindness and vulnerability. So I explore content in that sense, the inner world, but then also the outer, which is the economy stuff. So economy is also systems change. So how do we contribute to new ways of working with the environment or new ways of doing business? So I'm always thinking about inner and outer and how the two kind of are linked.
That was this week's guest, Nathan Scolaro, editor of Dumbo Feather. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. I hope everyone's having a really good new year. I really hope you've started the year with the right intentions and you're feeling energized and ready to get hit 2019. For me, it's a really positive and exciting year. I can't wait. I've got a few projects that I'm really excited to get off the ground, including some, meditation courses, a whole bunch of new guests on the podcast, as well as sort of a new vision and a new way to look at how to get the most out of people and create a conscious shift in how we live. And then that's the whole idea of the podcast. That's why I'm here and do what I do, is to try to create a conscious change in how we show up as people, because I think that's really important. And that really does tie beautifully into this week's guest, because Nathan Scolaro is the head editor of a magazine called Dumbo Feather. If you have never read Dumbo Feather, if you've never had a copy, I strongly suggest you go and find one. It's an amazing magazine. It comes out quarterly and it talks about, things like social change, including the environment or schooling or the economy and how we do business. And it also talks to, which Nathan will discuss, is the inner world and how we show up to be more compassionate, more mindful, and those sorts of things. So it combines the two, which is really at the heart of what I'm dedicated and loving to do with people, is the inner and outer. And so much of our work that we want to do in life focuses on the outer outcome, how we look, how we're perceived, the material possessions we've got, the outer, yet we don't focus as much on the inner health, our inner being, which I think is it's the core of who we are. And that's what this magazine really does beautifully, is it combines both. So this podcast really talks about how Dumbo Feather got created, but also its journey from a starting position of nothing to how it comes out in a quarterly magazine and turns into pages, and how the articles show up and how they do business and their small little team that they've got in Melbourne that does what they do. We sort of just get into the weeds of how to create a magazine, or a truly authentic magazine, from scratch. So I hope you like this podcast. I'd never interviewed somebody that was an editor, or I'd never been to a magazine, but these guys walk the talk. When you walked into it, it was really calm, it was positive, but it was really conscious. You could even see by the pictures and how they set their office up that they were thoughtful. And that's what I really loved it. They're in a little hub with, I think it's B Corp, and it might be another organisation which I can't think of right now, but there's this collective energy of consciousness, which I really loved. School of Life. So, and there's this beautiful connected energy of how things are done. So I was really impressed with the setup. I was really impressed with Nathan. He was a beautiful guy, very spacious when he talks. You'll hear this in the interview. He listened to the questions and answered accordingly. And I love people that do that. People sometimes come on and they've got pre-selected answers. That's not the podcast I'm looking for. So without further ado, firstly, get yourself a copy of Dumbo Feather. One will be coming out soon, or you'll find one somewhere, and check them out on Instagram at Dumbo Feather. And they've got their own podcast and they're doing their own great stuff. So they're Dumbo Feather. If you want a little bit more of me, hit me up at Luke McLean Mindfulness. You can get my Instagram there, or just lukemclean.net for my website. I've got some free meditations. You can hit up all my podcasts there and sort of check me out a little bit more. I do coaching, I teach meditation, and look around wellness and all that type of thing. So, if you like that, check me out. But without further ado, this is Nathan Scolaro from Dumbo Feather, and this is Conscious Conversations. Okay. We've got Nathan Scolaro, the editor of Dumbo Feather. Nathan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks. It's great.
Mate, I'm really excited for this interview because it's a magazine, that I hold deep to my heart, and it's one that I reckon I've been reading for the last 4 to 5 years, and I was really excited when you said yes to the podcast because I think, and we spoke earlier off air, but I want to sort of dig into the history of Dumbo Feather and really what was the magazine based upon? Like, what's been the values and the thought behind the magazine? Because what I can gather in the research, it started in 2003. Is that right?
That sounds about right. So 14 years ago.
Yeah. So
14,
I think it was well ahead of its time.
Yeah.
But obviously, it had to be based on something really solid and really thoughtful. So could you just give a brief overview to the audience on what is Dumbo Feather and the values it's based upon?
Yeah, for sure. So the magazine has evolved over its history, as things tend to do. It was initially started by a New Zealand woman called Kate, and she was working in a high-powered kind of corporate job, and she went to the news agency and she wanted to find a magazine that would inspire her essentially to follow something, a craft or a passion or something that she was excited about. And she couldn't find this magazine that she wanted on the shelves. So the entrepreneur in her, I think, decided to create the thing that she didn't see. And she stopped her corporate job and she started creating this magazine called Dumbo Feather. And so from its roots, it's always had this intention to inspire people to action in some way. And Kate started with profiling mostly craftspeople and artisans, small business owners, people locally that she was observing that were kind of turning their skills and passions into meaningful work. And at the heart of the format has always been this long-form conversation. So she was like, I want to be able to go deep into this person's story and to find out what the challenges are that this person's experiencing in manifesting their passion. What is it that excites them, and giving the nuance of the story, which we don't see in a lot of mainstream media. So that was always her intention from the start. And then the owners of a business called Small Giants, which is a family office that invests in for-purpose work, they bought Dumbo Feather from Kate about 6 or 7 years ago. So the names are Barry Liberman and Danny Elmagor. And Barry came from a long storytelling background. She was a documentary filmmaker, and she saw a lot of parallels in the kind of storytelling that was happening in the work that Kate was doing and what she wanted to do in the world as well. This idea that there is beautiful documentary style photo shoots and the long form nature of the conversation that allows for a documentary insight into someone's life, where there is nuance and small details that we get to have this glimpse into someone's world that we wouldn't otherwise get in the media. So she saw all of that potential.
Yeah, beautiful.
And that's where the spark happened for Barry and Danny. And then they've kind of shifted that kind of approach from artisans and craftspeople more to change makers. So people on a more broader scale, whether in the environment or politics, economy, people who are changing systems, changing hearts and minds to evolve the world and ideally make a better world.
And can you just dig a little bit more in, like, what typifies a change maker? Like when you want to interview someone or bring, look at a story that you're going to investigate, like is there a way or a system that you do that that they have to sort of hit a criteria that you think this is relative to the magazine or this isn't? Because I imagine that there's a little bit of a process to that to protect the culture of the magazine to make it really holistic and sustainable ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we really try hard to do that. And I don't have a checklist. That's what you're asking. But I have a good sense of who people that will inspire and that will motivate. And yes, absolutely, that person has to be making a change in their community, but that change doesn't have to be super significant. But, they don't have to be changing the whole economic paradigm that we live in, although some of them do, and that's incredible. But they can be making change just by starting a small ethical grocery store. Yeah. They've connected what their skills are to ideally shaping the world around them.
Do you look for the change, like the quality of the change, or do you look more for the inspiring story, or do you guys think that you can create the story based on
No, I think that's a great point. I think the person has to know their story well. And I would have had some sort of communication with this person already. I might have seen them speak online. They could have had TED Talks, or they've already done some media where I get a sense, okay, this person knows their story and they know how to turn their experience into something that will inspire other people to action. So that is definitely an element that I look for. I think as journalists and storytellers working at Dumbo Feather, we now have a good sense of the kinds of questions to ask, of the kind of narrative to draw out of someone, and I think I'm quite conscious of that, and so perhaps I could help turn anyone's story into one that inspires others. Yeah. I've never really considered that. But I have been doing this work for 4 or 5 years now. So, I've been doing these interviews for a long time. But at the start, definitely, I was really looking for people who knew their story and that were happy to feel vulnerable and were, comfortable in the kind of messiness of what they were doing as much as the parts of their story that did elevate and uplift. So.
And the understanding, when I read the magazine, there's a lot around change. I see there's threads of environmentalism, threads around mindfulness and sustainable fashion. Do you have a little bit of an idea of themes that you want to go for in the magazine, especially when you're getting 4 a year or 4 cracks at it a year, which isn't a lot. So I gather there's an element of making sure that there's a thread between all the magazines, but there's diversity that someone's going, I've read a similar article, I'm not going to need to buy it this time because it was a similar one to last quarter. Yeah,
definitely. So the way our content philosophy kind of is shaped is similar to Small Giants, which is this family office that I mentioned that Barry and Danny run. So their idea is to create empathy and a new economy. And so the way I think about the magazine is that we create content around empathy and the inner world values. So compassion and kindness and vulnerability. So I explore content in that sense, the inner world, but then also the outer, which is the economy stuff. So economy is also systems change. So how do we contribute to new ways of working with the environment or new ways of doing business? So I'm always thinking about inner and outer and how the two kind of are linked.
Yeah.
And then when I go to plan the year with Barry, the year of content that we do together, I think 2 magazines would have to explore those inner world values, and 2 would have to explore the outer, or that that there's a balance of both.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Last year, for example, we did an issue on climate change, which is something that's very much to do with our outer world, and then we did an issue on love, which is an inner world value. And so the heart of the content is all the same. We have a very strong sense of how we tell our stories. But what the particular issue is very different, and so people shouldn't feel like they've read this before.
They don't. I could imagine there's a challenge that you need to make sure that there's, they still feel comfortable with the magazine, that they're getting the same quality, but they're getting diversity in the story. So, and I think you guys do it really well because.
But the format also allows for this, right? Because we're profiling 5 people, we're telling human stories, and humans, as we know, are the most diverse. Yeah. So as long as we've got 5 long-form stories in that mag, we're going to get a pretty unique... they contribute to the humanity of what you're reading. So that in itself, I guess, separate to the planning I do.
And it's a heartful hit. Like because it's $15, so it's not a cheap buy, but because you go and flip through the pages before you buy it. Yeah. And I find myself, I'm not committed to buying it. It's not a guarantee, but I'll go through the articles, and 9 times out of 10 I'll buy it because it's a human story.
Yeah.
So it hits the heart, and it's like I want to know more about that topic or that person, or the intro to that story has got me hooked enough for me to go, there's enough in the magazine to invest.
Beautiful, yeah.
So I think there's an art to that because, again, 4 magazines isn't the norm. The price isn't the norm. So you sort of pushing barriers in certain areas to a certain audience you're trying to raise their consciousness through beautiful storytelling.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I'd like to know from that is what does it, from a blank, from nothing, from no quarter done to a full magazine, what's that look like? How do you come up with the inner outer, but then decide how it's all going to fit together, who's going to write the articles?
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to something you said before around why this resonates for you. There's always an article that resonates for you. And it comes down to the fact that when you tell a story well, you should do it with a lot of detail about the personhood and the humanity. And when you're really specific about the intimate details of someone's life or someone's story, that is when it has some sort of universal resonance or universal effect.
Yeah.
And so the more specific I am about my life, the more impactful it's going to be on yours. So that's really key to the way we tell story.
Yeah.
So did I want to say anything else about that? You go.
And I think with that, a story that I think it was it John Marsden around that story around schooling and stuff. I've got 5 kids, so it resonated with me, and we have homeschooled at times, and that
I think I took a picture of it and put it on my Instagram because I really wanted people to understand that the article and